Because I know both Honorable Navid Kamar and Honorable Roger Mancien are here, and I really want to start this. So thank you so much for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. My name is Monica Dame. I'm the Secretary General of Parliamentarians for Global Action. And welcome to PGA's 44th Annual Forum, hosted by the Parliament of Seychelles in a virtual platform. As speakers and panelists start to join us, let me just briefly point out a couple of house rules. For security purposes, please do not share your link on a public forum. If you wish to invite others, kindly share the registration link so that they can register themselves. 2, as I mentioned, interpretation in English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish is available. Please click on the globe at the bottom of your screen and choose the language you would like to listen to. If you are not speaking, I would kindly ask you to mute your microphone to bring background noise to a minimum. We kindly also ask that you have your cameras turned on unless you do not wish to appear on the video. And as you just received all, we are recording this session for our internal and institutional purposes. So if you wish not to appear, or we will also be taking photos and screenshots throughout these 2 days. If you don't wish to appear, please turn off your cameras. During the interactive sessions, we kindly ask you to use the raise hand function or request the floor in the chat box, and to speak slowly so that interpreters can translate questions or comments accurately. And that, I guess, is also for me to speak slower. During these 2 days, there will be times when we will ask you to answer some brief questions on a couple of surveys that will appear on your screens and that will contribute to the dynamics of the session. This survey is meant for members of Parliament, but if you are also attending just as an expert or a civil society representative and you have feedback on those surveys, please also send it to us, to our staff, so that we can get that. Lastly, if you are not yet a PGA member, we very much welcome and invite you to join our international network of 1,200 members of parliament in 150 countries, working on human rights, the rule of law, democracy, and of course, sustainable development. My colleague Charles will post the link right now to our membership form, and it would be a pleasure, of course, to join us. Without further ado, I am delighted to give the floor to Honorable Saeed Navid Kamar, Member of Parliament of Pakistan and President of Parliamentarians for Global Action. Honorable Kamar, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica, and thank you. With the permission of Mr. Speaker, I would begin and open today's session. It is an honor as the president of PGA to be opening the 44th annual forum, as well as the third CAP, Consultative Assembly of Parliamentarians for the Oceans, in collaboration with our hosts, the Parliament of Seychelles, and the Speaker's Office. Today's gathering is really a continuation of a series, and third in a row, and we hope we will see many more, of protection of an area which requires protection because it does not necessarily come under the jurisdiction of any sovereign country, and therefore is not subject to too many laws. While it holds almost half of world's not only biodiversity, but also so many other, our food, our oxygen, so many life-saving, life-sustaining materials, that it is a surprise that the world hasn't woken up to the fact that we all need to get together and look to see and look to preserve not just the marine animals, but also the human rights that take place on the high seas and generally the oceans. At a time when the world seems to be divided on the issue of human rights, at least from the perspective of our individual foreign policies, or because all of us are politicians and therefore have our specific views, here is an opportunity for us to get together, because it is for our future generations that we are gathering here today. It is for them that we need to preserve what is being exploited. It is for them, while climate change in general has come to the forefront of the agendas around the world, specifically focusing on oceans would really bring this thing into focus. We have left these oceans to either exploiting fishers, miners, and generally it's only a continuation of, except for those who follow certain ethical standards, a continuation of centuries-old concept of piracy that always took place on high seas. And now today, as parliamentarians, when we sit down and to talk about rules, we want all the countries of the world, all the parliaments of the world, to sign on to this treaty. Because, as you know, PGA is a global organization committed to preservation of human rights, with members, to at least 1,200 members from about 150 countries. So this is really the forum which can be, with our membership, be pushing for this. And we are grateful to the Oceans Alliance, as well as the Pew Foundation, that has been collaborating with us and continues to do so for this forum, in order to push this agenda and to get more and more countries. I fail to see why any country in the world would not be a member of this campaign and sign this treaty, which is, again, as I said, for our children and our children's children. So without holding the forum, because I'm also here to learn more than to speak, so I will hand the mic over, if you allow me, to the Honorable Speaker of the Seychelles Parliament, who's the host today, and to ask him to share his thoughts, as well as to formally, along with me, open this forum today. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable President of the PGA, Navid Kamar, I thank you for these words of welcome. Esteemed Secretary General of the PGA, Monica Adame, members of parliaments, distinguished attendees at this forum, good afternoon and greetings from Seychelles. I am more than pleased that our National Assembly is able to host this special and very important event, a forum of the Parliamentarians for Global Action on the High Seas Treaty. And I am very much honored by the invitation to say a few words of welcome for its opening. The invitation, I noticed, describes the treaty as a historic milestone in ocean protection for all people of present and future generations. Indeed, that is no exaggeration. The High Seas Treaty is no less than historic and no less than crucial. The raison d'etre of the treaty has been described as biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. The singularly crucial goal is to place 50% of the oceans under international cooperative governance. This target comes in addition to the goal of protecting 30% of the seas under national jurisdiction. This forum is an exercise to advance the adoption of the treaty for it to enter into force speedily across the globe. It is a vital undertaking, and I add my appreciation to the Parliamentarians for Global Action for undertaking the endeavor. It is a commitment to the most critical issue of our times, the preservation of our planet, its survival, and with it, the future of mankind. I am aware that we tend to get hyperbolic when we address this issue. I can tell you, I am not fond of exaggeration, but the truth is, there is no other way to refer to this cause other than with strong words. Anything that implies a mission of preserving the health of our planet deserves emphatic language, which places it as our #1 priority. What will be the point of all our other endeavors, our ambitions to eradicate disease and poverty, our search for progress in technology, our ideals for justice and coexistence, if we destroy our planet at the same time? So we have to speak on this with passion. It is appropriate for us to remember that life on our planet originated from the seas before spreading on land, and the oceans remain vital for the health of our world. Already they are menaced by our activities. There is a horrible situation of plastic waste with numerous implications for the food chain of all species. But also, as we have come to accept now, global warming and sea level rise. We have to stop, and we know it. The High Seas Treaty is necessary, and it is high time. It takes a unique approach in addressing the single most important issue for mankind through international cooperative agreement. Bringing about half of the area of the world's oceans under cooperative international agreement will be a way to safeguard them from the impact of harmful human activity and helping to contain the impact of climate change and protect biodiversity. But the treaty is not only about limiting actions, about not doing things. It also aims to control and guide the exploitation of the ocean's resources so that their benefits to mankind are sustainable and can be enjoyed fairly by everyone. For people of a small island country like the Seychelles, in the middle of a vast ocean, this cause resonates. There is no way we can be indifferent to the implications. Sea level rise is already a reality for us. The threat to marine species that we depend on is already evident. This forum seeks to advance the process of ratification of the High Seas Treaty so that work can begin earnestly on its goals. We are happy to be part of this, and I am happy to say that Seychelles has signed the treaty. The initiative gives us hope that although we are late and racing against time, we can bring minds and hearts and will to save our planet. This unique initiative to address an area of such vital concern to every country and nation deserves all our support. It is vital not only to those in bordering oceans, but to everyone on this planet, because what happens in the oceans is felt all over the world. Once again, I commend Parliamentarians for Global Action for bringing us together in this forum. It will be an occasion for us all to renew our faith and our commitment to the cause that this subject represents. I look forward to the uncontestable success of this meeting and also to the rest of your Consultative Assembly. I thank you very much for your attention, and I extend my very best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Honorable Navid Kamar and Honorable Roger Mancien, for opening the third Consultative Assembly of Parliamentarians for the Oceans. Thank you so much for your words. I get from that we need to think of future generations and that we need to get the mind, hearts, and will to really protect our planet. And without our planet, as you well said, Honorable Mancien, there's nothing else. If we end up without a planet, that's it. So we need really to get our will and to be working together to do this. Before we go to, thank you so much for opening this first session. And before we go to our keynote speaker video message, I'd like to call the attention of members of Parliament to the 2 questions that will be popping up on your screen in a moment. This is a survey, and I would ask members of Parliament to take just a couple of minutes to respond these 2 questions, please. They are both in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese, and you just need to scroll down so you're able to see all of the languages and the questions. And again, for all of those who are experts and civil society representatives joining us, if you have any questions or would like to send some feedback, please do so through our program staff. Just a couple of minutes. Okay. Ready? Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Your responses are very much appreciated. Our keynote speaker is Mr. Miguel de Serpa Soares. He's Undersecretary General for Legal Affairs and UN Legal Counsel, and he has sent us a video message. So Sarah and Charles, if you want to screen the video. Thank you.
Excellencies, esteemed parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to address you today as we stand at the transformative moment in ocean governance. On 19th June this year, the United Nations adopted a historic agreement under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, known as the BBNJ Agreement. In an age in which we often hear about the demise of multilateralism, the adoption of this agreement demonstrates the continued strength of the common will to protect and sustainably use the ocean. After nearly 20 years of discussions, this agreement is the first comprehensive and cross-sectoral ocean treaty in decades. It provides tools to strengthen the management of activities in over 2/3 of the ocean, a vast area that belongs to no single state, but is humanity's shared responsibility. The agreement represents a collective path towards improving the health and resilience of marine ecosystems. It is also a path towards greater equity in benefiting from and participating effectively in ocean activities. Given the urgency of taking action to reverse the decline in ocean health, I am pleased that the agreement has been signed by over 80 states since it opened for signature in September. The BBNJ agreement becomes the third implementing agreement of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The convention, which was adopted over 40 years ago, is often called the Constitution for the Ocean and remains the legal framework for all ocean activities. The Convention establishes various maritime zones and defines the rights and obligations of states in those zones. And the two areas beyond national jurisdiction, which are the focus of the BBNJ agreement, are the high seas and the international seabed area. Several organizations have competence over specific sectoral activities in those zones, such as fishing, shipping, or seabed mining. Up to now, however, there was limited coordination in implementation and some gaps, leaving cumulative impacts of human activity on ecosystems largely unaccounted for. The BBNJ agreement significantly strengthens the prospects for the effective and cross-sectoral governance of areas beyond national jurisdiction. The BBNJ agreement addresses four key elements. First, the agreement provides for the fair and equitable sharing of benefits from activities with respect to marine genetic resources of areas beyond national jurisdiction. Marine genetic resources are materials of marine plant, animal, microbial, or other origin which contain functional units of heredity or value. Marine genetic resources have many potential valuable uses, from biomedication to medicine, and are a growing area of research, including in the biotechnology sector. The agreement seeks to address the imbalance in states' capacity to access and carry out research and development in this respect. It does so by providing for obligations to share both monetary and non-monetary benefits. Second, the agreement provides for procedures for the establishment and implementation of area-based management tools, including marine protected areas. These are essential tools to manage sectors of activities within a geographically defined area in order to achieve particular conservation and sustainable use objectives. Such measures, which may include restricting certain activities, are vital for protecting and restoring ecosystems and strengthening resilience to stressors, including those related to climate change. To the extent that certain existing bodies have competence to establish sectoral area-based management tools, the agreement envisages consultations and cooperation with such bodies. Third, the agreement elaborates on obligations under the Convention relating to environmental impact assessments. The potential impacts on the marine environment of planned activities will have to be assessed before such activities are authorized to proceed. The agreement establishes processes, thresholds, and other requirements to that end. Under the agreement, potential cumulative impacts and impacts in areas within national jurisdiction will have to be considered as part of those processes. Finally, the agreement contains significant provisions on capacity building and the development and transfer of marine technology. These provisions aim to ensure that all states can effectively implement their obligations. Parties are required to cooperate in assisting other parties to achieve the agreement's objectives through capacity building and the development and transfer of marine technology. Modalities for doing so are provided. Significantly, dedicated funding sources for such capacity building are established under the agreement, and this is expected to level the playing field for states to participate in and benefit from ocean activities and govern ocean space effectively. The agreement also establishes a funding mechanism and sets up various institutional mechanisms to support states' parties in realizing its aims. Taken as a whole, this new agreement strengthens ocean governance in several aspects. First, the agreement fills certain regulatory gaps or addresses gray areas, for example, with regard to marine genetic resources and marine protected areas. it does provide regulatory certainty for both states and private actors involved in different sectors. Second, it provides mechanisms for cross-sectoral cooperation, promising profound impacts on reshaping ocean governance towards more integrated and holistic approaches. Third, the agreement also recognizes ecological connectivity, thereby acknowledging the ocean as a continuum and the need for coherence between measures within and beyond national jurisdiction. Fourth, the agreement makes a turning point in the recognition of the role of traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities in global ocean governance processes, as this is given prominence alongside other scientific information under the agreement. Participation of other relevant stakeholders, including civil society, the scientific community, and the private sector, is also embedded in the agreement. Before I conclude, allow me to highlight some of the benefits that may be derived from becoming a party to the agreement. The first benefit is a collective one, and that is enhanced conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity, resulting in improved health and resilience of the ocean. The agreement will be most effective with universal participation. But states also stand to benefit individually. Becoming a party to the agreement opens up opportunities to get a share in the benefits from activities with respect to marine genetic resources, as well as from increased cooperation in capacity building and transfer of marine technology, including strong and funded capacity building. In addition, only parties to the agreement will be able to participate in decision-making of the Conference of Parties. Such decisions will range from modalities from the sharing of monetary benefits from activities with respect to marine genetic resources to measures which may place restrictions on certain activities through the establishment of area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, and to elections of members of the various bodies established under the agreement. Of course, the agreement also comes with obligations, including to exercise the necessary jurisdiction and control to ensure that its provisions are implemented and enforced, and to contribute to the budget to be decided upon by the Conference of the Parties. However, assistance will be available for those states with limited capacity. Before I conclude, allow me to emphasize in the footsteps of the Secretary General of the United Nations the critical importance of seeing this agreement enter into force as soon as possible. Our ocean, our planet, and our livelihoods are under severe strain, including from the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. The effective implementation of this agreement will be key in tackling that three-pronged threat. It will also assist in reaching global ocean-related goals and targets, including those under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Rapid entry into force on as universal a basis as possible must be the aim, and I trust that we can rely on your support in this endeavor. The United Nations, and my office in particular, stands ready to assist in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Mr. Miguel de Serpa Soares for his keynote speaker. And this is indeed a transformative moment on oceans governance. And an opportunity to continue demonstrating the value of multilateralism and cooperation on humanity's shared responsibility, the high seas. Of course, PGA looks forward to assisting members in achieving the goal of the universalization of the BBNJ Treaty for its entry into force as soon as 60 countries have ratified it and beyond for its implementation. So we very much look forward to be part of this effort. Now, if you allow me, let's take this opportunity to take a photo of us here. So whoever wants to turn on their cameras, who hasn't done it already, let's take an opportunity for a screenshot. So Charles, let us just know when it's ready.
Almost there. Waiting for people to light up.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And of course, next year, we hope we will be doing this in person and we will be able to also clap and do more things in the next annual forum. As we move forward to the next session, and we will start with the interactive session right now, let me emphasize that this is one of two interactive discussions that we will have some interventions on the agenda to get us started, but we encourage every member of parliament that is joining us today to participate by raising their hand or by writing their question in the chat box. So don't feel that if you are not in the agenda, that doesn't mean that you cannot please, we really much welcome the interactive discussion. So for this first of the two discussions, I am delighted to introduce Deputado Antonio Niquis, Member of Parliament of Mozambique, PGA board member and PGA convener for the Campaign on the Oceans. It's very nice to see you, Deputado Niquis, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Monica. Let me start by again recognizing the effort of PGA leadership in ensuring the effectiveness of our organization and pushing to take it to another level of excellence, even though there are so many ongoing constraints after COVID and what is still going on in the internet system. My role today, I think, will be much easier as a convener. I think we all aware that the Ocean Campaign has been one of the strategic areas that PGA has been engaging, not only to protect the oceans, but also to ensure the sustainability of our marine resources and the seabed. We'll have for the opening discussions before I move, but let me also make sure I can introduce experts who will be joining us. We will be having Mrs. Rebecca Humbert, Director of Alliance, and we will also have Mr. Daniel Cacheleris, the cross-cutting coordinator of IC's Alliance. They are also with us here, and Mr. for Protecting Ocean Life, IC's Pew Charitable Trust. My colleagues from who is the Speaker of the House, and PGA board member is also there. Are you there, Valerie? Are you going to be part of the process as Honorable Raf Rejevun, MP from Vanuatu, is a Minister of Climate Change, Adaptation, Environment, Material Management. So, as Mozambique, I would like to make sure you can all have your Portuguese as well. I don't see so many who can catch up on some Portuguese. So what I'd like to highlight is that can you hear me now?
Yes, we are losing you a little bit.
Yeah.
It's breaking the connection.
And now, how's it now? It's okay?
Yes, we can hear you there.
Oh, yeah, this is part of the challenge. Yeah. Mas poderia, para ser mais flexível, poderia contextualizar a campanha dentro daquilo que tem sido os esforços da PGA, em particular relativamente ao Tratado do Mar, portanto, a Convenção das Nações Unidas sobre o Direito do Mar, e todo o quadro jurídico internacional que visa assegurar a proteção, criando as obrigações para com os Estados em relação a esta matéria em particular. Temos também o acordo de aplicação da Convenção das Nações Unidas sobre o Direito do Mar, relativo à conservação e à utilização sustentável da diversidade biológica marinha das águas situadas para além da jurisdição nacional dos Estados. Portanto, o tratado da BBNG, que é comumente designado também por Tratado do Alto Mar. E também temos como perspectiva ver o tratado reforçado pela Agenda 2030 para o desenvolvimento sustentável, tanto que é dentro do quadro global da biodiversidade de Kunming, Montreal. Obviamente, o papel da PGA no processo, enquanto global parlamentares no mundo, maior rede individualmente afiliados, podemos dar a nossa contribuição para a sustentabilidade, em particular no âmbito da campanha dos oceanos da PGA. E aqui a PGA tem já um plano de ação, o plano de ação em 2019, com a realização da Assembleia Geral da PGA em Praia, Cabo Verde, portanto, que é também um país lusófono, falante da língua portuguesa. O plano de Belmont-Pan, de 2021, este é um outro instrumento importante. E também mostra-se relevante reconhecer que também a particularidade, a peculiaridade de juntar-se a demais entidades, como é o caso da IC Alliance, portanto, que fez conjuntamente o lançamento da campanha da PGA para a universalidade e implementação do Tratado do Alto Mar. Portanto, há várias iniciativas que os deputados podem tomar partido. Temos uma boa equipe ao nível da PGA, a Sara, a Ana, para citar alguns nomes que estão behind the magic, naturalmente com a leadership da Mônica. O Tiago também esteve envolvido neste processo em tempos, mas quero acreditar que há aqui uma dinâmica, é uma pequena, mas fazer muito para garantir que este processo ocorra com a devida naturalidade. Portanto, incluir neste processo, como eu já havia dito, a obrigação, portanto, de não... que é o dever, efetivamente, dos Estados, de estarem em compliance com aquilo que está prescrito no Tratado do Alto Mar e permitirem que todas as políticas que daí derivarem pelos Estados possam gerar uma maior sustentabilidade neste processo. E enquanto parlamentares, sobretudo desta rede, desta maior, que é a maior organização, tanto parlamentares no mundo, no planeta Terra, tem que ver com a nossa ação em relação à campanha dos oceanos. Daremos todo o nosso contributo para podermos contribuir significativamente para a sustentabilidade do meio ambiente marinho, para a sustentabilidade das espécies marinhas e, inclusive, o processo de exploração dos recursos que jazem no subsolo marinho. Então, estes são alguns elementos que eu gostaria de levantar para provocar o debate, mas, como eu disse muito bem, porque nós temos conosco aqui especialistas, não é? Eu não iria alongar-me. Os especialistas que eu já citei vão efetivamente dar subsídios mais técnicos, vão aprofundar o potencial, vai permitir que a gente tenha aqui com isto um capacity building e, através da nossa ação, contribuir nesta campanha dos oceanos. E agora abrir a discussão. I'll just come forward and open the discussion among all participants and encourage everybody to be, no matter if they are listed on the program, to be more active and engaged. So my role will be much easier. And I would like to call upon Mrs. Rebecca, the director of the High Sea, with insights. Please, Rebecca.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Connection's been a bit patchy. Okay, great. Thank you so much for the introduction. Perhaps I'll just give a very brief summary, but then I'll hand to Daniel or Julian, who have had a very long history, shall we say, with the agreement and the technical details, much longer than I have. And I'm going to be presenting in the next session, so I don't really want to take up too much of people's time in this session, but just to say that the treaty obviously is an incredibly timely and important opportunity in terms of addressing some of the governance gaps that have been facing the oceans in the area beyond national jurisdiction, and that the 4 elements of the treaty really give us an incredible opportunity to address those gaps, which we really need to do if we are going to both halt the loss of biodiversity in our seas and also enable the ocean to fulfill its role in mitigating and adapting to climate change. So in terms of the key features of the treaty, I think they were already outlined by Mr. Miguel de Serpa Soares very clearly, but the importance of the ABMT chapter and the environmental impact assessment chapter are incredibly critical to being able to address those threats. And for us to be able to deliver on our commitments to protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. So I guess I might just leave it at that and then allow others to either make comments or answer questions if any of the parliamentarians have questions about the technical details and technicalities of the treaty. Sorry, Valerie, would you like to make a summary or take an introduction?
Thank you, Rebecca. My intervention really, Belize was one of the first set of countries who signed on to the treaty, and I believe that was critical for Belize, because Belize was part of that negotiation team with CARICOM in terms of, and it's been going on for several years, is my understanding, to try and get this treaty underway and signed. So it led Belize as a country, it led with AOSIS and the CARICOM negotiations, and there's no surprise there because of the importance of the marine resources to Belize in terms of livelihood, in terms of national development, and Belize having had a track record, a proud track record, I would say, in terms of its marine resource management. However, as was mentioned previously, there is that governance gap for that jurisdiction area. And so this treaty was important for Belize, as I'm sure it was for those others who signed on in September, because of the broader scheme of marine conservation and marine resource management. It speaks specifically to those resources in the high seas, and it will, once ratified, it will definitely have a more, how do I say, maybe a more direct impact, more direct bearing on area-based management in an area that is critical and that can impact what is being done in the jurisdictions that Belize does have some control over. So it's an important tool as part of its wider toolkit of marine conservation management. It does create a critical framework, as I've checked with those who were very much involved in these negotiations, and why it was necessary, or why Belize felt it was necessary to sign on so quickly. It's because it does create that critical framework to fill a gap that existed under the current law of the sea, biodiversity protection and management of the high seas, and particularly for small island development states such as Belize. That's important, because without that gap being addressed, a lot of the efforts that have been done, or a lot of the accomplishments made by Belize, can easily be threatened or undone had that not been addressed. So let me pause there, but it was critical. There's a reason why Belize was very active in those negotiations. And it's because of the direct link to the health of the marine resources, the impact, yes, of course, with climate change and the climate crisis upon us, and the need to ensure that Belize was very much a part of the discussions to address a very significant gap that existed that threatened the efforts that it was already undertaking. I think I see Julian's hand up for an intervention.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Honourable Woods and Honourable Nkwiche for having me on. I thought maybe I'd say a few words and maybe that will get the juices flowing for members. But firstly, thank you, Monica, to you, the PGA, for having me on, and to all your staff. You do produce excellent material for the PGA members. It really does sort of cut to the salient points. Thank you to the Parliament of Seychelles also for hosting this, and Honourable Mancien for having us all together. It's really important that we meet to discuss this. But I think my main thanks go to the parliamentarians and the members here. We met in person, at least I met some of you in Praia a couple of years ago. So thank you for picking up the high seas as a topic of interest. I think it's fair to say that your interest in this has had an impact already. The treaty negotiations that took place in August last year and in March this year were intense, but they wouldn't have happened without political will. I think that magic ingredient you can ascribe a little bit to your efforts and your interest in this. I've been involved in a number of international processes. And when there isn't that will, things go slowly and they don't come together. And when there is that will, as we saw almost in August last year and definitely in March this year, a number of the big political issues finally reached agreement. And I think thanks to members here for their interest and support and the actions that you've undertaken, because I think that's a really important ingredient and it would not have happened. And I think what we recognized last year was that this was a kind of do or die moment in the negotiations. It had gone on for so long, and it felt as if if it wasn't going to happen at this point last year, it was never going to happen. But we've got it over the line. I think the next steps are entry into force. I think we've already mentioned the obligation to try and conserve 30% of marine areas by 2030. That's not very far away. There are some things that we can be doing to start to think about what the protected areas might be, but we really need the treaty to enter into force for that to happen. There are a number of other things that we can be doing in preparation for the treaty entering into force. The UN will have to agree a budget, and there's certain kind of procedural things that will need to happen at the UN. But all of this requires political will, so ongoing attention and focus is required, and then we need certainly the 60 countries to have ratified once we have all the signatures. I'll stop there and see if we've got any questions. Thank you.
So this is an interactive session. I'm wondering if there are some questions, if there are some comments or any other. Navid, you want to say something?
I see Diputada Margarita Stolbizer, Honorable Nkwiche.
Ah, bueno, Diputada Margarita, ¿cómo está? Muy bueno. Por favor.
Hola, ¿cómo les va? ¿Estoy disponible para hacer una pregunta?
Sí, por favor. Tienes la palabra. Sí.
Bueno, primero que nada, muchísimas gracias. Realmente felicito una vez más a todo nuestro equipo de PGA por haber organizado este foro anual. Por supuesto, lamentando no poder encontrarnos de manera presencial, pero siempre es muy valioso hacerlo porque son muy valiosos los temas que tienen nuestro foro, entonces lo importante es este intercambio. Agradecer también al Parlamento de Seychelles por haber sido anfitriones de este encuentro y habernos facilitado sin duda todas las herramientas técnicas que tenemos a nuestro alcance para hacerlo. La incorporación de este tema sin duda tiene valor estratégico para nosotros como parlamentarios, porque van a ser nuestros parlamentos los que van a tener que trabajar prontamente en las ratificaciones para alcanzar la plena vigencia. Yo tengo, desde que conversamos sobre este tema en mayo, en nuestra reunión de Nueva York, varias de las dudas que se me plantean y por eso me gustaría consultar a quienes vienen trabajando esto más desde el punto de vista técnico, más desde lo interno, sobre todo porque escuchamos muy bien cuáles son los contenidos que tiene el acuerdo, hemos leído todos esos puntos que forman parte del acuerdo, pero yo la primera pregunta que quisiera hacerles, porque necesitamos estar advertidos sobre las dificultades, es cuáles son los temas pendientes. Porque lo cierto es que, como ocurre muchas veces con los acuerdos internacionales, para alcanzar los consensos, terminamos siempre bajando los estándares de protección, bajando, digamos, las pretensiones que podríamos tener sobre un nivel más alto para alcanzar acuerdos más específicos, y entonces los temas pendientes son demasiados. Ahí es donde radica sobre todo mi preocupación, ¿no? Y entonces lo que quiero preguntar es, ¿cuáles son las cosas que han quedado para la resolución de lo que será la conferencia de partes en su momento? Y un punto en particular, que es lo que me parece que genera más dudas siempre, que es qué es lo que va a ocurrir con el reparto de beneficios de los usos genéticos. Porque atrás de todas estas cuestiones que tienen que ver con el cuidado del ambiente, que son tan importantes para nosotros como defensores de los derechos humanos, lo cierto es que por detrás de todos estos buenos intereses hay intereses económicos de los estados que son los que siempre dificultan el avance. Entonces, mi otra pregunta es, ¿qué creen ustedes que va a ocurrir con Estados Unidos o con aquellos países que tienen realmente muchos intereses económicos, o bien porque trabajan en la investigación, o bien porque podrían afectar a sus intereses relacionados con la pesca, ¿no? No nos olvidemos que estamos hablando no solamente de lo que es alta mar, sino también de lo que tiene que ver con los espacios marinos de protección más allá de eso. Y entonces creo que hay, insisto, demasiados intereses económicos. ¿Cómo se van a distribuir? ¿Cómo será el reparto de los beneficios, de los usos genéticos? ¿Cómo será el reparto respecto de los beneficios monetarios y no monetarios? Creo que son los referidos a las tecnologías, y algo que también creo que lo planteamos en la reunión de Nueva York, si se puede pensar en algún régimen basado en un sistema de patentes, porque además estamos hablando siempre que las investigaciones genéticas, atrás de todo eso están siempre el régimen de patentes, ¿no? Si se puede pensar en un régimen basado en patentes o un protocolo donde las partes depositen sus muestras genéticas y todos puedan utilizarlas, ¿no? Que es parecido al sistema que existe para la agricultura y la alimentación en la FAO, donde los grandes aportan y todos pueden usar, ¿no? Yo creo que este es el tema núcleo que tenemos en el medio cuando tratamos estas cuestiones y que necesitamos bajarlo a la tierra, a la realidad, porque para nosotros que vamos a tener que ser intermediarios de la participación o de la definición de nuestros países, necesitamos tener también el acceso a esa letra chica, conocer cuáles son las dificultades, los intereses que hay en juego, qué es lo que hay detrás de todo esto para que realmente podamos aconsejar o promover en nuestros países, a través de nuestro trabajo parlamentario, que nuestros países se incorporen, ratifiquen el tratado, ¿no? Nosotros necesitamos, como países en desarrollo, conocer exactamente cuál va a ser el papel, cuál va a ser el beneficio para los países en desarrollo, teniendo en cuenta que los países desarrollados juegan otro tipo de cartas en esto, ¿no? Bueno, muchísimas gracias y quedo a la expectativa de las respuestas de quienes más conocen estas cuestiones.
Muchas gracias, Margarita. Bueno, los nuestros especialistas que van presupuesto a partilhar las contribuciones y ahí hay una mano de nuestro especialista, Daniel, por favor. Daniel, please.
Thank you so much. That's a great question. And I think it goes back a little bit to the history of how these negotiations started. So as was mentioned before, there were gaps in the Convention on the Law of the Sea that states wanted to address. For example, there was no mandate to create area-based management tools in areas beyond national jurisdiction. But there was also uncertainty around what regime would apply to marine genetic resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And in 2011, states with different interests, all sort of coming from different directions, managed to create a package that they all felt had enough in it that they wanted to pursue it. So I think the question of what is the motivation of different states in engaging in the process depends a lot from state to state. Different groups had different priorities within the 2011 package. And then the approach throughout the negotiations was to advance in lockstep, so that progress in one part of the package was necessary in order to advance in other parts of the package. And I think what we've seen, as Jules said, the last two sessions were very contentious, but we saw constructive engagement and a lot of ownership by virtually all states that were participating in the negotiations. And I believe the fact that just a few weeks after being open for signature, we already have 83 signatories shows that parties still feel that what they came up with in those final negotiations is something they still stand behind. And so specifically on the question of the sharing of marine genetic resources, maybe to go into a bit more detail, again, there were sort of two tensions. One was an interest for those resources to be fairly and equitably shared. On the other hand, there was a concern that if you put in place a system to do that, you would hamper marine scientific research. And so for the moment, what we ended up in the text is that the monetary benefit sharing for the marine genetic resources from areas beyond national jurisdiction is done in a decoupled manner. So the actual amount of money that is being paid is not related to the overall value of products derived from MGRs from areas beyond national jurisdiction, but it's simply a fixed amount that only developed countries have to pay. And it's scaled according to their normal contributions to the treaty. There is an option for the COP to later decide on different modalities, but for the moment, it's sort of it's an administratively simple system that provides upfront funding. And that funding doesn't go to states, it goes directly into capacity building and implementation support for the rest of the agreement. So I think you have to see it as sort of a compromise, solving the different tensions in that negotiation. But what we ended up with is something that all of the vast majority of countries stands behind, and it provides early upfront funding for capacity building and implementation support. And it is not administratively cumbersome starting off with. And I hope that answers at least a part of the question.
That's very, very, very clear.
Gracias.
Daniel. Thank you.
Honorable Nikki.
Yes, go ahead, Monica.
Thank
Please,
you. Thank
Monica.
you. Maybe you were going to say something similar. I just want to make sure. I know that Honorable Ralph Regenvanu, Minister for Climate Change Adaptation, Energy, Environment, Meteorology, Geohazards and Disaster Management from Vanuatu, is also making an intervention. Just if we can perhaps make this parenthesis to have him in his intervention, and then we can continue with with questions and answers.
Well, definitely, that's correct. I think we can move that direction.
Thank you.
So please, Honorable Ralph.
Thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be able to be a part of this meeting. And greetings from Vanuatu, where it's very early in the morning in the Southwest Pacific Ocean. I want to maybe go on a tangent, but it's directly related to this treaty, and it's the issue of deep sea mining. In my country and in the Pacific, we are on the forefront of this new experimental industry that is about to really, it has started in terms of the prospecting that's happening now. And there's actually a fight going on right now in the International Seabed Authority, as some of you may be aware. And this historic new high seas treaty talks about the protection of biodiversity in the deep ocean and demonstrates the commitment of our governments to prioritize the health of our ocean. However, deep sea mining, which is progressing very fast in the context of the International Seabed Authority, which is a obscure organization based in Jamaica, which basically is charged with providing the rules for mining the deep seabed in international waters and also within EEZs. I was previously the leader of the opposition in Vanuatu, and in April 2022, I became the inaugural chair of the new organization, Pacific Parliamentarians Alliance on Deep Sea Mining. And our objective was to raise awareness among the members of parliament in the Pacific Island countries, which are the countries which are probably at the forefront of seeking to mine the seabed. And your members may know that on the 25th of July in 2021, Nauru, a state in the Pacific, triggered the so-called 2-year rule, which basically is a part of the implementing agreement under UNCLOS, which permits the Council of the International Seabed Authority to approve applications by sponsoring states for exploitation of the seabed. And this approval was then granted on the 5th of September last year. But what is happening now in the International Seabed Authority is that states are now pushing back and saying that we need to have either a moratorium on deep sea minerals exploitation, or we need to really develop some very, very comprehensive rules and very, very transparent processes for being able to undertake such deep sea mining. I think for us as members who are concerned with the objectives of the BB&J, it's really important to note that deep sea mining is very inconsistent with the objectives of this treaty. But also the High Seas Treaty on its own will not stop deep sea mining from beginning, because the political momentum that we are talking about developing in terms of the adoption and ratification of the treaty needs to happen in the other areas. It's almost like there's different silos that affect the deep sea. And one is ISA decision-making. And there's a need for the ISA to cooperate with the High Seas Treaty. And it's imperative that members of parliament and governments push for the ISA to follow the environmental impact assessment procedures that are laid out in the treaty. For example, BBNJ parties have an obligation to promote EIA provisions in the International Seabed Authority. Standards and guidelines which are developed under the BBNJ will need to be promoted in the International Seabed Authority. And as the International Seabed Authority does not have any binding regulations or standards regarding EIAs for deep sea mining activities, BBNJ parties will be required to cooperate and coordinate with the ISA to ensure that these EIAs are carried out in accordance with the High Seas Agreement. And because of the far-reaching and possibly irreversible consequences of deep sea mining, many states, including my own, and now I think we're up to 23 states, are calling for basically a moratorium on deep sea mining to basically offer blanket protection from this destructive industry for all areas beyond national jurisdiction, including all MPAs established under the treaty we're referring to now. And we as parliamentarians need to promote our countries, push our countries to promote the adoption of relevant measures within the ISA. So I would just like to make that link, because for us in the Pacific, it's a very present threat. And at the Pacific Island Forum leaders meeting last week in the Cook Islands, which is the highest level meeting of all Pacific Island states, we were in the Cook Islands, and the Cook Islands is one of the countries pushing for deep sea mining. And there was a call there that we will now begin a process of dialogue within the Pacific Island countries starting next year to adopt a common position, because we have a number of countries like Vanuatu, like Palau, like Samoa, like Fiji, who have called for a moratorium, versus on the other side, Nauru, which is the country pushing the most, the closest to achieving ISA approval for deep sea mining, and then countries like the Cook Islands, Kiribati. So within the Pacific, we have this, the greatest divergence of positions on whether deep sea mining should proceed. And it's something I think we need to keep in mind when we talk about the urgent need to ratify the BBNJ, that we need to also bring these principles into the ISA, which is proceeding very fast towards the adoption of rules which would allow deep sea mining to proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister Roth, for your great insights. I'm wondering if there is some additional comments, inputs, or questions.
Yes, there is one from me. I raised the hand on the screen.
Sorry, Petra. How are you? Welcome.
Antonio, hello.
Please.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank Mr. Regenau. And I do not want to repeat what you just said, because it's really totally important to stop and to halt a deep seabed mining. Besides the moratorium that is called from some states, there is also a parliamentary activity calling for a moratorium. You can find it on the homepage of PGA, where you also can sign online on this moratorium. I'm sure I will find and then copy the link to it directly. And I just wanted to make not only the link which Mr. Regenwanu made to the BBNJ, but also to all those countries who signed or who are members of the UNCLOS, of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. as far as you're member of this, you also have a voice and a vote in the deep seabed in the deep seabed mining when it comes to decisions in Jamaica in the Seabed Authority. So I also want to encourage all other countries who are not directly affected to stand in solidarity with those countries who are on the first hand affected directly, but also nobody knows what will happen when the deep seabed is destroyed. It has a huge impact on the balancing and on the functioning of the ocean, and so to the oxygen we breathe and to the fish stock and whatever else. So I think it's in the interest of all of us to have this moratorium before we really do not know what impact it has and what damage it could cause, to really raise our voice and be loud on that and really stop it. Even if you come from a landlocked country, as I come from Austria, it's an important voice. Thank you.
You're on mute, Honorable Nikis, and just to mention that Honorable Regent Van was one of the promoters of this parliamentary declaration. So very much, Petra, thank you so much for that reminder. And of course, that was one of the main things that Minister Regent Vanu has worked on promoting and pushing for parliamentarians and politicians in decision-making spaces to make sure to protect the deep sea bed. I'm not sure if Honorable Nikise, I see him. Are you there? Yes. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I'm
Thank
ready.
you.
I have two hands. I can recognize Julian and then Jonathan. Please, Julian.
Thank you very much. Just quickly, in reaction to Honourable Stolzpezer's question about some of the tricky things that we have to do. Some of these are quite procedural, and I think Rebecca is going to talk about these coming up. So rules of procedure and the sort of things that institutions need. There will probably be some issues that we failed to agree properly in the treaty and will become a bit more contentious. But that we'll talk about those in the next session. Then the other thing that I think is really important, and this perhaps speaks to the fisheries issues and indeed the mining issues, is this obligation to cooperate. So we've already talked about silos and the fact that one arm of the government doesn't talk to the other arm of the government. I think the treaty kind of tries to knock that down a little bit. So there is a direct obligation in the treaty to cooperate, both as states within their obligations. So when states then sort of take off their BBNJ hat and put on their RFMO hat, the fisheries management hat, they, in theory, ought to be sort of taking forward the aims of the treaty. And if they've signed it, they shouldn't be undermining those aims of the treaty. Then there will also be this sort of obligation, I think that the mandate for the BBNJ treaty to actually interact, so its scientific bodies may be able to interact with the scientific bodies of the other organizations. So that was just something that I sort of wanted to respond to on Honourable Stolzpezer's question. And then Minister Ralph, I've just come back from Jamaica, and deep seabed mining is now my main preoccupation. I think you've said everything I want to say almost on this. It would be crazy if we went ahead with deep seabed mining under the current state of knowledge, with the current state of regulations, whilst on the other hand, we've just agreed the BBNJ agreement. It would be an obscene contradiction in my mind. There are interactions also foreseen within the treaty. I've just mentioned the cooperation obligations. And then the other point that you raised, which is completely fair, is the environmental impact assessment regulations. So at the moment, the ISA has in place non-binding regulations for exploration. So this is the prospecting stage of seabed mining. These are non-binding, and they are not as comprehensive as was foreseen in the general obligations for environmental impact assessments under BBNJ. So there's clearly a need to go back and put in place sort of stronger and binding obligations when it comes to the exploration activities for deep seabed mining. The regulations for actual exploitation, as I say, these haven't been agreed. They're looking like they might be a little bit stronger and a bit more up to par with international best practice for environmental impact assessments. But these haven't been agreed yet. So that was one other thing. And then the other thing that the Seabed Authority can do in a more positive light going forwards is its work on capacity building and technology transfer. So I think the ISA can sort of point to some good work that it has done through building capacity of biologists and those undertaking marine scientific research in the area. And that's fair. I don't want to sort of not acknowledge that work that does get undertaken in the ISA. But I agree. There's now 23 countries calling for a moratorium, pause or ban, and I think it's really important that we have more states joining that. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Please. Go ahead. Please, you have the floor.
That's me?
Yes, please.
Okay. Senator Jonathan Joseph from Antigua. I think Julian would have touched on some of the points that I wanted to raise, but let me ask specifically, what are the systems that we have in place to ensure that member countries live up to the obligation that they would have signed on to, especially when you look at the exploitation of the seabed?
This is a very specific and sense. Go ahead, Julian.
Julian, could you answer that?
I can try and give it a go. So thank you, Honourable Joseph. So this is where the treaty has this this challenging role of filling the gaps in governance, but also coordinating where there is existing governance. So for deep seabed mining of mineral resources of the deep seabed, the International Seabed Authority does have the mandate under UNCLOS. It's a kind of sister agreement to so BBNJ is now the third implementing agreement under UNCLOS, and the fish stocks being another, and then the 1994 agreements, correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, is the other one. So it's kind of on a par, and I think we need to respect the fact that the ISA is responsible for it, but at the same time acknowledge that we have implemented through the BBNJ agreement perhaps a stronger set of environmental standards, which the ISA can't ignore, on the other hand. So we can't ignore the ISA, but the ISA can't ignore BBNJ. I think we're already seeing this this understanding in both the ISA, with many member states actually acknowledging the role of BBNJ, despite the fact it's not entered into force, and also within, I think, RFMOs, you're starting to see the fisheries community understand. Now they can see the text of the treaty, what the obligations are, what there were perceived threats whilst the negotiations were undertaken. But I think now there's a shift to perceived opportunities. How can the fisheries world contribute to the implementation of the goals of the BBNJ treaty? And I think that's becoming talked about slowly, because it's not yet into force. But I think now with concrete text, people are sort of being a little bit more level-headed and less defensive. And as I said earlier, there is this obligation to cooperate. Your governments are, in theory, the same body, even if it's very different people in different fora. I hope that answers some of your question. I'm not sure it did completely.
Thank you, Julian.
Yes, so I think I don't see any other coming to a close of this. Before we move on, I just wanna comments and remarks and insights from our experts and members who have been actively involved in this campaign, and we hope that this is going to be a further job PGA is doing on campaign oceans, and we look forward to see you all with good projects implemented in bills and resolutions and laws passed in our respective parliaments, and of course adopting those international treaties. I'll now move forward and hand over to Monica to proceed with our session. Monica, please. Thank you everyone for this very thoughtful and inspiring session. Monica, please.
Thank you, Honorable Nikis, and thank you so much to Julian, Daniel, Beck, and of course to our honorable parliamentarians, Honorable Valerie Woods and Minister Ralph Regenvanu for their interventions, as well as for Ms. Baer and Diputada Margarita Stolbizer and Senator Joseph for those three questions, sorry. And perhaps as I give the floor now to Ms. Petra Baer, PGA board member, treasurer, member of parliament from Austria, and very much a champion for the oceans and to address the climate crisis. I just want to bring also a few of the points that maybe Beck in her presentation will be also making, but about also this other piece of the marine protected areas and this effort to really get a more consistent oceans governance throughout the UNCLOS. And it's part of this effort that even though in this very difficult international context has been able to be adopted and signed by 83 countries now. So I think that even though it is in a very difficult and concerning moment for international multilateralism, I think it's important also to see those inspiring and positive news and try also to be part of that as we move forward. So with that, Petra, it is a pleasure always to see you, and you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Monica, and welcome everybody to this second session this afternoon, which will focus on the importance of the treaty and outline challenges and opportunities for parliamentarians, in particular in the goal for the treaty entry into force by the 2025 UN Oceans Conference. And as Monica just mentioned, we're already 83 countries who signed the BBNG. During the SDG summit in September in New York, the signatures were opened, and we are all very happy that in such short time so many countries already signed. And also mine was among the first ones who signed, and you may ask why a landlocked country like Austria is among the first ones to sign an ocean treaty. And I think it's easy to explain because the high seas belong to everybody, and it is a common heritage of humankind. And so it's also my Austrian heritage, and for the benefit of Austrian people and landlocked people everywhere. When we consider that 43% of the Earth's surface is covered by the high seas, not by those parts of the oceans that belong to a particular country or that are economic zones, but really the high seas that belong to everybody, then of course we can imagine what a lot of biodiversity is inside there. And we all know that the oceans are a lot under pressure. by pollution, by shipping, by noise, which affects especially the marine mammals, by overfishing. We know that there is 50 times more carbon dioxide bound or sank in the ocean than in the atmosphere, and that means that the ocean is tremendously important for the regulation of our ocean, of our climate. And every second breath we take every second breath of oxygen comes from the oceans as well. So as I already mentioned, Austria is also a member of the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, and this gives us a voice when it comes to oceans. And I think that it's really important that we use our voice because as parliamentarians of global action, we have to focus to protect human rights. And there are many boundaries, many interlinkages between human rights and the oceans, not just to think about nutrition and to think about the human rights to live in a healthy environment, which we are developing. And so since 2019, we have within PGA the Oceans campaign, and I'm happy that also today at the third consultative assembly of parliamentarians for the oceans, so many of you joined today and expressed your interest and your commitment and your readiness to work on the oceans. And it's now my great pleasure to once more, we already spoke to us, but to once more to introduce Mrs. Rebecca Hubbard to all of you. She is director of the High Seas Alliance and will give us a presentation for about 15 minutes. And afterwards, again, there will be the chance for Q&As and exchange of experiences you have. So Rebecca, over to you. Good to see you again.
Hi, thank you, Honourable Bear, and thank you everybody at the Parliamentarians for Global Action for joining us, for partnering with us in this and collaborating with the High Seas Alliance on this event today. It's really exciting to be here and also just to have the opportunity to talk to parliamentarians, people with power who care about the High Seas Treaty and helping to turn it into real action on the water. So I'm just going to share my screen. I have a presentation, really it's some nice pictures to look at while I talk. Hopefully, can you see my screen? Yeah, okay, I'm just putting it into full screen. Okay, I don't know if there was a chat there or not. It's interesting, I'm in Manila in the Philippines, and there's a number of delegates from across, I think, 10 ASEAN countries, and we've had some really interesting discussions today already. And I think some of the interventions that the other members have made just in the last session are kind of interesting and reflect some of the conversations that we've had today. So I hope that this is useful and we can continue this conversation in terms of understanding the benefits of the High Seas Treaty, not just for developing nations, but for developed nations, for all people, and how we can turn this monumental agreement into action as quickly as possible. So as long as that moves, yes. So just briefly, in case members don't know who the High Seas Alliance is, we're a global alliance of, I think it's 55 NGOs now, plus the IUCN. And we have members really in all regions around the world. And it was established in 2011 and has really been extremely focused on driving this, the agenda towards achieving a high seas agreement. And I'll touch a little bit more on the journey again in a moment, but in terms of the High Seas Treaty, I thought, just because I saw that a few people don't know much about the High Seas Treaty, I would start with a couple of basics, which the Honourable Bear has already mentioned a little bit. The area beyond national jurisdiction, or the high seas, are the areas outside of national waters. So that's typically outside of 200 nautical miles. And it really covers almost half of the planet, or about 2/3 of the global ocean. And so one of the reasons, which I think people have already mentioned, that it's so important, the High Seas Treaty, is that it just is so important because it covers half of the planet. It is about protecting half of the planet, which we haven't done a comprehensive job at protecting for so many decades. So really, size matters. This is a case where size really does matter. In terms of how the treaty is really relevant to people, to humans across the globe, one of the most important, or one of the most, I think I might have skipped a slide. Yeah, oh no, okay. One of the most important roles that the ocean plays, and increasingly as climate change worsens, is its role in mitigating climate change, and its a critical role in absorbing carbon and heat, and drawing that carbon down into the seafloor, and storing it or sequestering it away for long periods of time. It is, I mean, this is a graphic of the ocean biological pump, which I personally love because I'm a big fan of fish and all the creatures in the ocean, from the tiny plankton to the enormous whales. Each part of the food web and the ocean biological pump is critical to the functioning of the ocean and its role in regulating the climate. It absorbs around 30% of carbon dioxide regularly. It has absorbed over 90% of the excess heat that we have produced as a result of fossil fuel burning. And we all know that it produces a lot of our oxygen around every second breath. So, but it's not just a physical and chemical process. It's because it's filled with life that it can also continue to do this. And this is a critical thing that it's been quite hard for some, I think, climate negotiators to necessarily get their heads around, because it's a biological or an ecological concept, but it is increasingly understood and appreciated in the climate sphere as well, as in the oceans sector. So I think I accidentally deleted an earlier slide of mine, maybe when I was developing it. But one of the other slides that I wanted to mention, which I've lost somewhere along the way and is relevant to the climate, but also to food and livelihoods, is that the ocean is teeming with life. It is, the largest reservoir for life on the planet. And because the high seas are 2/3 of the global ocean, it really has an enormous amount of life in it. And that is incredibly critical to the ocean being able to provide these ecosystem services. And as we know, it's crucial to feeding, around 3 billion, or supporting around 3 billion people on the planet. And even though the high seas, a very long way away from people who are necessarily fishing in their coastal waters or even their national waters, there are no boundaries in the ocean. So what happens in the high seas in terms of impacts on fisheries, in terms of pollution, in terms of what's taken out, in terms of impacts on habitats or ecosystems has an impact on fisheries and coastal ecosystems and fisheries management and people's lively capacity and ability to be able to have food security, to be able to have sustainable jobs. So I think that it sometimes, and as well, you know, that energy system within the ocean really passes boundaries, not just in terms of the national jurisdiction, because it doesn't know those boundaries, but in terms of through the water column and in terms of through different systems. So it's absolutely crucial for food and livelihoods. And the other thing is, I guess, equity and justice in terms of the High Seas Treaty is been mentioned, and Daniel really clearly described. It doesn't just deal with protecting biodiversity and sustainable use of marine resources. It does very clearly address the access to and benefit sharing from the marine genetic resources, and that really seeks to right I guess an inequity that we have across the world in terms of capacity for developing nations to be able to access data, to be able to contribute to scientific development. And I think that the High Seas Treaty has really done a good, they've really reached a really balanced and good agreement, as can be demonstrated, again, not just by the fact that they had consensus adoption of the treaty, but then 83 countries signing the treaty within days of it opening for signing, and from countries all around the world, from all the regions. So I think that really demonstrates the support for those different elements of the treaty, and how the treaty offers us a really grand opportunity, and an opportunity that is, as I think Julian or someone mentioned, quite urgent, actually. We really have a lot to do in a short period of time. And in that respect, you know, we have made these commitments based on the best scientific advice that we have, that we need to protect 30% of our oceans by 2030. It is 2023. We are talking about an enormous area, and we need to get started. So the High Seas and the High Seas Treaty specifically is absolutely crucial. We cannot do it without the treaty, regardless of the fact that I think, you know, it was discussed, the interactions with the other bodies, and, you know, the ISA was, you know, discussed, and there's of course the RFMOs. There are a number of things that you can do in those bodies, but the treaty offers this critical piece of the puzzle that's been missing there. And it also, as I think Jules was explaining, really offers the opportunity to raise the ambition in those other bodies as well. So like the ISA or the RFMO. So it's a really important and obviously key piece that we need to deliver if we are going to deliver on our commitments and our promises to the future generations, as was discussed. So just wanted to quickly touch on the reasons why we obviously need a High Seas Treaty. I'm sure many of you know these, and we've already discussed some of them in terms of deep sea mining, climate change, pollution, shipping. There's the impending threat of geoengineering, and of course the huge gap in governance that we've had, despite there being a number of international laws and implementing agreements already. So where we are now is thanks to some monumental efforts, probably thanks to many of your members. As Julian was saying, you know, the political will, the effort that's gone into getting us to this stage has been enormous. Over 20 years since the discussion properly started in the UN. I spoke with someone a couple of weeks ago that actually talked about the fact that they'd had a discussion about a high seas treaty in the 90s, but there you go, that's not included in the official timeline. But we've really come a really long way, but we have, and it's taken a long time because it is such a complicated and big achievement, but we do need to move fast. So the challenge and the discussion right now, I hope that you can still hear me because I look like some other people have frozen. Can you still hear me?
Yes, Beck, we can hear.
Perfect, no problem at all.
Okay, great, thanks. You looked a bit frozen to me, but okay, great. So the challenge that we have now is to move on to ratification and entry into force. So this is where I really wanted to hear from you, and where we've already had some interesting conversations today here in this workshop. But we're very keen to hear from your members about their potential and interest and process so far. So where we're at, we have over 83 countries have signed the treaty, but signing is important, but we're on the race for ratification. And I've accidentally misspelt ratification there. But we're really aiming to have at least 60 countries ratify the treaty by the next UN Ocean Conference in France in June 2025. We know that's ambitious, but there is a lot of political will, as we've already discussed. So, and a number of governments are really supporting that, and are also offering resources and other things to help states ratify. So the goal is at least 60 within 2 years, and then universal ratification by the first Conference of the Parties for BBNJ, or at least a lot more than 60, because for it to be effectively implemented, we need more than just 60 countries. So in terms of what Parliamentarians for Global Action can do, there's really a few elements that we've split this up to, and I believe that there is a document. I'm not very good at watching chats at the same time as presenting, but there is a background note, excellent. Sarah's put it in the chat from PGA that has some key information and then some proposed actions for parliamentarians. And I think there's 3 areas for action. There's in Parliament, in national parliaments, there's in the public with your citizens and constituents, and then there's in the international arena. So starting in Parliament, members can host events or briefings to educate fellow members of Parliament and government departments. You can ask parliamentary questions. You can raise the High Seas Treaty in relevant committees, so in either cross-cutting committees. One of the things that's been mentioned here at this workshop is that, you know, because of the 4 pillars or the 4 elements of the High Seas Treaty, it actually is really relevant to a whole series of departments and different areas. And lots of governments and people back in the capital, as we would say, don't necessarily know about each of those areas and how it relates. So helping to educate not just your fellow members of parliament, but even kind of encouraging your governments and supporting them to educate their own bureaucrats in departments is really important and useful. And of course, contributing to national legislative processes. So there's, I mean, Daniel is very, and Julian's also on the call. They're much better at the technical details than I am in terms of the legal processes. But of course, there's different ways that countries can ratify, or different processes for countries to ratify the treaty. In the simplest places, it might just be a presidential decree, whereas in other countries, there may be consultations required, reports presented on how the treaty will impact other operations. You know, they're required, or reforms or amendments made to existing legislation. So contributing to those consultations and reforms and reviews is really important, and a really great opportunity for PGA members to get involved nationally. In the public sphere, I think it was Jules that mentioned the incredible importance of political will, that you know, to get this treaty agreed and adopted and opened with such momentous enthusiasm by so many people. You know, one of the reasons that happened is that many people in the alliance and in the negotiating teams actually built support, a political support for the treaty, and to get it implemented back in capital, to get countries to do the hard work to turn this into reality, is going to require more political will, which ultimately is driven by public support, right? And you know, politicians, as you all know, have an obligation to also serve your constituents. So it's important to also educate them as well, though, because many people don't even know what the High Seas is, let alone what the High Seas Treaty is. So engaging with civil society, with other NGOs, publishing media stories, talking on the radio, or, you know, really some of that really simple but important preparation of the ground, so that when we get into, so that the parliaments can go through their ratification processes, but also when we get into implementation, there is this support, this active support, activated support from the public, for example, for creating high seas MPAs, or, you know, requiring thorough environmental impact assessments of really destructive new activities in the high seas. So I think that's a really critical role for PGA members as well. And then I guess the third space is in the international arena. There's lots of regional forums and international forums and events where we're really looking to, you know, promote and educate and engage on the High Seas Treaty in different forums. So we had at the UN General Assembly, when it opened, the treaty opened for signing, we had a high-level event with the Blue Leaders Alliance, and had something like 23 ministers and heads of states attend, showing their commitment to signing and ratifying as soon as possible. At the COP in December in Dubai, we'll have another high-level event, and I really encourage you to contact me if you will be there, any of you will be there, or your governments. We'll be putting on another event, and we really hope to have some countries signing onto onto our commitment to sign. It's symbolic signing because obviously we don't hold the treaty. That's in New York. But there'll be other events as well. So in the lead up to the UN Ocean Conference, there's an event in Costa Rica next year. There's the Monaco Blue Initiative and many other things, Our Oceans, those kinds of international forums, just where I think it's important that we keep this momentum going, that we keep people excited about the High Seas Treaty, because this is, you know, as we say in Australia, where the rubber hits the road. It's where really it gets the hard work is required. So we need as well to keep people feeling excited about that. So there's just two other areas which, as I kind of mentioned them, but beyond the ratification focus, which is crucial, we can't get to any of the exciting features of the treaty if we don't get at least 60 ratifications and entry into force. So that's the majority of our focus at the High Seas Alliance for now, whilst also beginning on these other two features, which is building strong institutions that will support implementation, and then as well starting to prepare the ground for implementation. In terms of building these institutions, so Jules mentioned it before, and the other member, mentioned the importance of these committees and the decision making. So there's a lot of decisions that will be made or that need to be made that are not in the agreement, and will either be made at the first COP. But there's a lot of work to be done to even get to that first COP in terms of designing how these committees will work, because you can't wait till the first COP to have all of these decisions, because there's too many decisions to make in 1 or 2 weeks of meeting. So really we're pushing and supporting strongly a preparatory commission. So I've dropped the link into the chat for our briefing, which discusses the things that a preparatory commission can work on. And actually, Daniel's an expert in this area. So if you have questions, he's here and can answer detailed questions. But there's also this other concept called provisional application. And it's a bit similar to the idea that when a country signs the treaty, they're not legally bound, but they're obliged not to act in a way that undermines the objectives of the treaty. So as others were saying, on the one hand, it's inconsistent to sign the treaty, and then on the other hand, to promote deep sea mining, because those two things are not actually consistent. So that's around the obligation of signing, but provisional application is a specific thing that a country can say as soon as they sign the treaty, which basically says they will start to apply and act in a way that as though the treaty is in force already, before it is even enters into force and becomes international law. And this is something that we should all be encouraging our governments and working to do, because that is an actual thing that can be started already. We don't literally have to wait another couple of years until we get at least 60 ratifications. We can start applying the treaty. The other element that members can already start looking at and contributing to is preparing for implementation. So in terms of the protection of biodiversity and sustainable management, there's the ABMT objectives and the environmental impact assessment objectives. So governments can already start preparing the case for proposing high seas MPAs. They can already start looking at collecting the scientific evidence, describing the threats to a place, consulting stakeholders and rights holders, looking into Indigenous knowledge of sites in the high seas that we'd like to create MPAs, so that when the first COP happens, we can actually have proposals for high seas MPAs that are presented and can be voted on and can be approved. So that's a really important thing, and it will take some time. So that's an opportunity for members to be involved in. And as well, it's a bit trickier with the environmental impact assessments, but I think where a country has signed, there's certainly an opportunity to be calling in the High Seas Treaty and raising the importance of assessing the impacts of activities based on the BBNJ obligations and provisions. So I think this is my second last slide. I just wanted to really, I guess, outline the kinds of support that the High Seas Alliance and our members can offer to the PGA members. We have an incredible alliance of groups, as I said, I actually don't know how many countries we're in, because some of our members have many country offices. I think it's over 100 countries, but it's very, very broad, and we have some incredible expertise. Some of my colleagues, Julian, Daniel, and many others have been involved in the development of the treaty and the agreement, and have really superb expertise that they can share both in workshops, in webinars, in briefings, in connection with other experts or scientists or lawyers. We, as I mentioned, are organizing these high-level events, but we're also really keen and are working in a number of countries and all of the regions to promote ratification, so we can support your efforts. And we have a number of resources, a toolkit with like detailed fact sheets and a range of other materials that we share with our members. And PGA is a member of the High Seas Alliance, so we're really happy to share those to support you. And we have I don't have it in here, but we have a High Seas treaty ratification tracker online as well, which tracks the progress of countries in terms of signing and ratification. And yeah, we stand ready to support you and in helping to get the treaty entered into force as soon as possible. That's it for me. Thank you.
And a very, very deep thanks back, dear Rebecca, for not only sharing this information, this crucial information, but also underlying it with these beautiful images of maritime wildlife, which really was very impressive. And thank you very much for clarifying that there is no need to wait until mid-2025, but that there is a lot to do already now. I think that's new for many of us. And one of the learnings I take away is that PGA, together with our partners, the High Sea Alliance and the Pure Terrible Trust, can help us in translation from this very, very technical treaty to politics, and that we can then do the translation from politics to awareness raising also among our constituencies. I think that's key for sure. And I now want first to hand over to Honorable Patrick Kensenhuis from Suriname. I see him on a long table sitting, and then I will open the floor to all other participants. And I want to invite you not just to ask questions, and there might be several questions, but also if you have already some concrete ideas how to take action, or if you have already experience in pushing other ratifications that could be transferred to the do the BBNC as well. So please let us know and share your knowledge with us. And now over to Honorable Kenzenby. And we can't hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm honored to commit an intervention on today's discussion about implementing the historic High Seas Treaty, which is a landmark agreement for the conservation and sustainable use of the marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. The treaty represents a significant milestone in international environmental governance and its successful implementation will have far-reaching implications for the protection of our oceans. As parliamentarians, we play a crucial role in the process of ratifying and implementing the High Seas Treaty, and we hold the power to ensure its timely entry into force. Our responsibility extends beyond traditional environmental concerns. It touches upon a fundamental human rights-based perspective. As we know, the urgent need to protect the high seas is the fact that we need to protect the human rights of all people to a safe, healthy, and sustainable environment, amongst other associated human rights. The most important reason to protect the high seas is that oceans store 50 times more carbon dioxide than our atmosphere, while at the same time being disproportionately affected by increasing carbon dioxide. They regulate our climate and weather patterns by transporting heat from the equator to the poles. The high seas are nearly 2/3 of the world's oceans and represent 95% of the Earth's total habitat of volume. Our oceans are not just a source of biodiversity, but also essential to the livelihoods of millions of people. They provide sustenance, employment, and opportunities to countless communities around the world. However, the lack of comprehensive governance in the high seas has led to a decline in the health of these vital ecosystems, directly impacting the human rights of those who depend on them. By committing to the signature, ratification, and full implementation of the High Seas Treaty, we can not only protect marine biodiversity, but also uphold the human rights of those who rely on the ocean for their well-being. This treaty is an embodiment of our shared responsibility to ensure that the benefits of the healthy ocean are fairly distributed and the burdens of its degradation are justly shared. To facilitate a deeper understanding of the High Seas Treaty and encourage its swift ratification, I propose interactive discussion sessions that provide parliamentarians with the opportunity to share experiences and lessons learned. We can explore the opportunities and challenges inherent in ratifying the treaty and discuss strategies for its timely entry into force. By engaging through national groups, we can leverage the collective wisdom and expertise of our respective countries to ensure that the treaty becomes a reality. In these sessions, It will be of utmost importance if we can address questions such as the specific challenges and opportunities that our nations face in the ratifications process of the High Seas Treaty, certainties that the treaty's provisions align with our national interests and respect the rights of our citizens. Also, the best practices which can be drawn from other international agreements and regional efforts that can inform our approach to the High Seas Treaty, but also the different kind of collaboration and support we can give to one another in the pursuit of sustainable and equitable future of our oceans. Let us use this gathering as a platform to strengthen our commitment to the High Seas Treaty, not just as an environmental pact, but as a human rights imperative. Together, we can make a meaningful difference, ensuring the long-term well-being of our oceans and the communities that depends on them. Thank you.
I thank you very much. And I also will take the opportunity, first of all, to encourage you to ask for the floor by raising the virtual hand you find on the top of your screen. Secondly, I want to once more stress that Sarah Monavi is here with us, and she is working especially for the Oceans Campaign. And if you need any help, any technical help, any liaison with for instance, the High Sea Alliance or others, then please let Sarah know. She will be happy to assist you. And she is also the one who is working on this very good background information we have, and all the fact sheets you can find in different languages also within the chat. So, as I do not see any hand at the moment, let me ask a question first. Rebecca, you say that one of the most pressing problems is to generate political will to really go further and really to fill this treaty with life. Do you see any particular hurdles or obstacles in particular we have to overcome, or is there a general lack of political will? How do you estimate the situation?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think in some ways there is a lot of political will, but as you know, we mentioned with the treaty, it seems until now a lot of the heavy lifting has been done in New York with the delegations to the UN. So a lot of people, a lot of the expertise, and there was, I think, heavy investment from a number of national delegations to the treaty and getting it done. I'm not sure that there's as much knowledge and personal, I guess, engagement with the treaty back in all of the capitals. And so I think that is a challenge for us to build the understanding of what it means and the support and ownership. And I think that I think there is political will, definitely, not just can be demonstrated by the 83 signatures so quickly, and but also, there's a huge amount of, when the treaty was agreed, there was an enormous amount of media coverage that was I don't know if there was any negative coverage. If there was, it was very small. It was by and large extremely positive and really celebrated as a win for multilateralism as well. Like, it really inspired this sense of hope that governments and countries will work together for a greater good, So I think that there is political will, but turning political will into action as well is also a challenge, and doing it quickly, while we still have momentum, because there's a number of steps that need to be gone through. So I don't feel as though there's too much opposition, although I think, you know, as someone mentioned it earlier, there are certainly some industries that maybe, you know, have concerns around the treaty or may raise some objections in certain countries. Like if, you know, some countries have very big fishing interests in the high seas, then there may be some, you know, debate internally there. The deep sea mining issue might stimulate some debate and challenges internally. But I mean, ultimately, I don't think it's anything that is not that we can't overcome, but it is a matter of really building ownership of the treaty in the capitals. And ideally, one of the interesting things that was mentioned today, and I'd be interested if the members in this meeting have the same situation. There are a couple of elections coming up in the ASEAN region in the next 18 months. And, you know, elections can put a speed bump in a ratification process. And in that respect, you know, I guess for members of parliament, it's important to think about getting bipartisan or multi-partisan support for ratification. So it's not just the governments and the parties, or the parties in government, that have ownership and strong support, but also the other parties in governments. Yeah, did you want to have any reflections, Daniel, from today as well, just relevant to this?
I think, thanks, Beck. I think everything that Beck just said, I fully agree with. Today, someone phrased it, because we were in Manila, someone phrased it as bringing New York to Manila. And I think that sort of can be expanded to bringing New York to all of your capitals. And then I think on top of that ownership, there's also some sort of process knowledge. How does a ratification actually work in your country? And that may be very different. We heard a few examples today of dualist systems that have to pass primary national legislation before they are able to ratify. And that may involve, for example, a legal analysis of what's already there in the national legislation that would have an interaction with the BBNJ agreement. We've also heard one country representative say that they have a very different system, that they first ratify the treaty, then it becomes part of their national law, and then they look at implementing regulations, but at that time they already count against the 60 countries that have ratified. So I think that is another sort of, not necessarily a challenge, but it's sort of crunching through that potentially quite challenging and time-intensive process in your respective countries to get it done as quickly as possible.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I have two requests for the floor. The first one was Jonathan Joseph, please.
Okay, thank you once again. The whole question of the political will to actually sign on to the treaty, but then there goes the next level of ratification. I'm not sure if this is a question or a statement, but when you look at the whole question of geopolitics and the fact that in terms of some member countries having fisheries interests as well, and perhaps one doesn't see any immediate benefits on a national level. Do you think perhaps that these may be some of the the reasons as to why we're not seeing ratification more quickly than we expect?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Honourable Joseph. I think at this point, to be honest, we weren't really expecting to see countries already ratifying, because as Daniel explained, that process, it can be quite lengthy to ratify just from the procedure. So I don't, at this point, I know that there are many countries who have started the process to ratify, but they know that it will take them at least a year. So I don't think that yet that it's holding people back. And it's also an interesting question. I mean, I think it will pose some challenging conversations internally for a lot of countries in terms of, you know, that the interests of fishing or other industries. But interestingly, again, today we had these conversations with developed countries presenting how they saw the benefits out of the treaty versus the developing countries. And, you know, there was an interesting question like, oh, well, the developing countries can see that there is a benefit for them because there is a very specific element around capacity building and technology, marine transfer of marine technology, and the, you know, benefit sharing from marine genetic resources. And they were questioning, is there even anything in it for the developed nations? And the Australian representatives were very, I would say, adamant and passionate about the fact that they saw great benefits for the developed countries in ratifying the treaty. They saw great benefits in the MGR section, slightly differently to developing nations, not about necessarily access to finance, but certainly opportunity for cooperation for scientific research and development, and expanding that an understanding of the ocean science and research and potential, and of course the great benefit of achieving a healthy ocean, and the fact that, as we've just discussed, it's really critical for all humans, regardless of where you live. You need to breathe, we need a safe climate, we need access to, you know, secure food. So they were very, very invested in that, which was good actually, because some of us went, oh, I don't know, but they were extremely vehement about the benefits for them. So I think that's the slowness to ratify is at this stage not yet because they've hit political barriers, but because they're going through a procedure that takes more time than just a sign, which is quite straightforward for lots of countries.
But that also means that you're taking it serious, which is also fine. Yeah. Bernard, George, and to the next one.
Thank you very much, and good evening or good morning, depending on where we are on the planet. May I say how fascinated I was by all the presentations. Thank you, Rebecca, for an absolutely marvelous walk through the treaty. It really is quite incredible. Oops. Here we are. Excuse me. Here we are in the middle of the southwest of the Indian Ocean, surrounded by water, and of course it's extremely relevant to us, everything that we've talked about. But I wonder what was the driving force for because the high seas is out there. It's something that's not relevant. I mean, we're interested in our territorial sea and perhaps our EEZ. The high seas is way out there. It's you know, it's not immediate, and it's not in front of us. And yet the uptake on signatures has been absolutely amazing. And if I digress a little bit here to say that we're so happy that the Seychelles Parliament, National Assembly, in which I sit, was able to participate in this wonderful event, because it is relevant. It is relevant to us. But I'm wondering to what extent the other countries see the relevance. And I say this in the context of ratification. I think there is, as we've seen very often, a great desire to sign up. And then, of course, the interest wanes and it drops off, and ratification takes an awful long time and very often doesn't happen. And on that, on this note, I want us to be able to be amongst the first to ratify. And while I sit here in the National Assembly and I'm responsible for bringing ratification motions, it would be absolutely wonderful if, while Speaker Marcian was still in the chair and while I was still majority leader, we've both got another 18 months to run, we'd be able to bring this ratification. That would be an absolute joy. And in fact, we both will work extremely hard to ensure that we are, if not the first, certainly amongst the first to ratify. So rest assured that we're going to do that. But my initial question relates to the driving force. I mean, what investment? I mean, how do people invest in this treaty? How do countries invest in this treaty? Is it because there are certain things which are of absolute relevance to them? And the honourable delegate from Vanuatu earlier made a very, very strong point about deep sea mining. You haven't heard this from me, but I think we are going to take the position in this country to support the moratorium as well. So that's quite good news. It'll probably be made official in the next month or so, or perhaps at COP28 soon. But what is it like deep sea mining for Vanuatu and perhaps for us, or is it the carbon sink, which you very, very clearly brought out, Rebecca, in your first diagram? What is it that will compel people and nations to ratify now? What will it bring to them, rather than just the common benefit of humankind, which is a lovely notion, but perhaps a little bit irrelevant to most people? What is it that's going to bring people and countries to ratify? I'd like to know that, because it'll help me to write my ratification speech when I get to make it. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe let me add something a little bit in contrary. Maybe you think there is, besides very rational relevance Bernard is asking for, is there also an emotional component you think you should address? Because when I saw the pictures, when I saw the images, that does something inside me. So maybe we also can use, as politicians, we often also work with emotions. What emotions could be maybe addressed when it comes to the ocean?
Excellent. Daniel and I have been just debating this together, but I'm going to hand over to Daniel, and he can, because he's actually also been involved in the negotiations for a lot longer than I was. I was very fortunate. I came in at the winning moment when it was adopted. But yeah, I'll hand over to Daniel.
Thanks, Beck, and thanks, Honourable Bernard. I think that, I mean, just on on your initial question, after the IGC 5.2, which was the resumed session of IGC 5, High Seas Alliance did a media analysis of what points were being picked up. And obviously, sort of our initial expectation was that this is going to be the climate relationship, ocean climate relationship, or it would be area-based management tools, or it would be food security. And it was a very strong signal that what got picked up is hope, multilateralism, countries coming together. And it is just as Honorable Ms. Beyer just mentioned, it is sort of an emotional issue. It was probably against the background of times where there were a lot of bad news and terrible things happening on Earth. And that was a major component of the uptake of a lot of traditional media and social media as well. So I think that's part of the answer. The other part of the answer that is sort of a bit more technical and pragmatic, I think, is that there is an existing commitment of protecting 30% by 2030. And this is not necessarily a goal that all countries will care about. I mean, obviously under the CBD, also all parties to the CBD committed to it, but it will have different priorities for different countries. But there are some countries, and I think it's not few countries, that are quite committed to meeting that goal, and making BBNJ enter into force is such a pivotal tool to fulfill that other objective. And that will motivate those countries to fight for it. And the good thing is that because BBNJ is a package overall, there are lots of tools in other parts of the agreement that other countries care about. For example, the monetary benefit sharing provision on MGRs. For example, the capacity building and transfer of marine technology provisions that countries that deeply care about hitting the 30 by 30 goal can leverage to also motivate other countries about the issues that they care about. So I think it's sort of the emotion, the hope to show that multilateralism is working, and then the balance within the agreement that will help us move it forward.
And maybe just to come in as well, we have as well a series of fact sheets and talking points, and Sarah and the PGA develop specific tailored fact sheets for your members, for all parliamentarians, which you can access as well. And I think that they're a really great resource because, you know, they're filled with the brilliance of people like Daniel, who understand both the technicalities, but also in the, you know, informed by all of this other kind of media and communications analysis as well.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions or any other comments or ideas some of you would like to share with us? If not, I have another question, which I will break. Daniel just mentioned the 30%, and that is a long way to go there. How exactly, what are the parameters that are decide about what 30% of the high seas will be protected? Is it the one with the most fish stock, or with the best quality, or the worst quality? What are the parameters?
So I can start, and then Daniel can add in. The treaty, as I understand it, doesn't necessarily have a requirement for what the proposed high seas MPA site needs to include in terms of it needs to have, you know, extraordinary biodiversity per se. It has guidelines on the process and how it needs to be proposed, how a marine protected area needs to be proposed. So a party to BBNJ, at least one or more parties need to propose it. We couldn't propose it from the High Seas Alliance, for example. It needs to fulfill this process in terms of scientific data and scientific information that it presents. It also has, you know, requirements around assessments of the threats or impacts on the area. It needs to incorporate and include Indigenous knowledge, and then a management plan needs to be drafted as well. And then there's a consultations that need to occur, and the scientific and technical body assesses the proposal as well, and then any feedback from the consultations like can or should be incorporated into the proposal. But in terms of exactly like how good a place needs to be proposed, I don't think there's a requirement, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I think there's a list of indicative criteria in the annex to the agreement, but it's very explicitly just suggestions. You may be aware there are also other existing efforts to prioritize areas, like the CBD EPSA process, or marine mammal areas. There's a shark one as well. I forget the name right now. But just as Beck says, there's no sort of minimum criteria. It's what countries decide to propose, with some guidance being provided.
But there are indicators where you can think that makes more sense to protect these areas compared to other ones. And you can also recommend, for instance, if one of our countries as a member wants to propose a region, then you could give us an idea why this and not that, for instance. Okay. Okay. So the last chance, if there is anybody else who would like to take the floor, please raise your virtual hand now. And if not, we are a little bit before schedule. That's also fine. And I will hand over to Monica for her conclusion. Thank you very much, Rebecca and Daniel. You really gave us a great insight, and I think that, yeah, it should work. That many of us will engage, and many of us will look to fill this time gap between now and mid 25, and try to start with preparations and try to start to work on pre-ratification issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petra. And I saw, Beck, that you raised your hand, so I'll give you a minute to finish your sentence.
Oh, I was just actually going to ask if any of the members on the call have know if their countries have already started the process to ratification, and if they've been involved in any of that, or yeah, we'd be interested to hear from your members and from the members here about their experiences, if they have any so far.
Is there anyone who may want to? I've seen from Cape Verde some chat, some conversation in the chat, exchanges on also kind of going towards ratification. But this is mainly Beck and Daniel, just as Honorable Consent has mentioned, the platform to really begin this work with PGA members, and to make sure that, as you have mentioned, that there is not only this technical side and the technical assistance that Sarah and Anna are very much welcoming to provide, but also the other political advocacy and media aspect that is so interesting. And Daniel, I thought it was so interesting to learn that it is not necessarily the climate crisis or the triple planetary crisis what moved people, but hope and inspiration. And maybe carrying that throughout. I mean, the momentum obviously is always, it wanes, no, within time. But thinking about and having very in our minds that North Star of how this represents a push towards something that brings a benefit for humanity. And I think that's a very important point. It's also not one thing that is in silo. No, we see COP28 coming up. How does the High Seas Treaty interact or is linked towards those conversations as well that will be happening. And maybe even saying, well, we have this success, this achievement with the High Seas Treaty, how COP28 now comes up also with something that can be positive news. And that could be, I know the conversations are already, the venue is a little bit controversial and contested, so I know that that is still there to see, but it is this, nothing happens in a vacuum, right? We are in a continuum of different moments, of different platforms, and we should see them in collaboration or complementing each other rather than, well, now we have the High Seas Treaty and this is what's going on. And so before I get into the closing remarks, I very much want to say thank you to every speaker, Rebecca, Daniel, of course to Ms. Baer for her lovely moderation, to Honorable Cansenhas, and for everyone who participated in the questions. And I would like to call your attention to a second survey. So this one also has 2 questions. And this is very much for us to understand how this discussion went about, and whether the information that was provided gives you, the encouragement to act and pursue a next step. So I'll see, we're hoping there. So again, I will give a few minutes for these. We have enough time, so please feel free to elaborate on the third question as well. That would be very useful for PGA Secretariat. Gonna give a couple more minutes since we have time. 1 more minute for those responses. And thank you for those who are taking time to respond on the third, the other. No, it's always very useful for the Secretariat to learn feedback. So any good, not so good, everything is very helpful to the Secretariat to learn and to improve in the work that we do. Okay. Well, it is my pleasure to give the closing remarks of this third Consultative Assembly for Parliamentarians on the protection of the oceans. And of course, I would like to first and give a huge round of applause to my colleagues Sara Monaville and Ana Repas, who have done an amazing job. Not only today, no, this is obviously the let's say like one moment within a full continuum of hard work and effort. So Sara and Ana, thank you so much for putting together this wonderful agenda and these wonderful conversations. Thank you also to Honorable Roger Mancien's leadership and generosity for hosting this first day of the 44th Annual Forum dedicated to the oceans. And thank you so much, Bernard. We very much appreciate the National Assembly of Seychelles' commitment to human rights and to democracy, to the rule of law, and of course, to protecting our oceans and our planet. So thank you so much. Thank you as well to all our members of parliament who joined as participants, as well as those who joined as speakers. We very much appreciate all of your contributions, and it is quite important for us to make sure that everyone knows about the treaty, but also understands it. And within these 3 hours, I listened a lot from the first couple of speakers, why it is important really to protect the planet. What does it mean not only to present generations, but also to future generations, to thinking about what we are facing in this climate crisis, biodiversity loss and pollution, and what actions very concretely decision makers can take to be able to resolve this. And in doing so, we should not, and you are the decision makers, but we should not only think about today, what are we leaving behind and what are the future generations? And as we have seen around the world, really young people have go into the streets to really make sure that their human rights and the rights to a healthy environment are addressed. And last year, as Honorable Consensus and also Ms. Baer pointed out, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted a resolution precisely on the human right to a healthy, clean environment. And this is quite important for us as parliamentarians and for you to know this implication about human rights and protecting the planet and humankind. I listened also a lot to what political will entails. How does it look like? And how to create it, to build momentum and to create that capacity. And I truly believe that PGA is extremely well placed with 1,200 members in 150 countries to be that network and to be that platform. We have the capacity to be able to speak to you not only in making those messages to resonate to you, but then for you, in some things very, very technical, for you to really make sure that they resonate with your constituents. Beck mentioned, and some of you mentioned, I think Senator Jonathan Joseph from Antigua mentioned, well, how do I make sure that this connects to my relevant nation, to my current context? And I think that is a big challenge, not only on this topic, but in democracy as a whole. How really parliamentarians are able to convey those voices of all representatives, of all their constituents as the representatives. And I think that link between making sure that it is understood why the oceans, the high seas, is so important, even though it is not within the national jurisdiction. But it is not only, it's a way to protect, of course, our planet, but it is also, and within the keynote address that Mr. Miguel de Serpa Soares mentioned, it is about that equitable share of marine genetic resources. It is about strengthening the capacity building of all of the countries and making sure that there is cooperation among them. The importance really of beneficial of being a member state of the High Seas Treaty, it really comes with being able to design also the infrastructure, to bring what the funding will look like, what economic benefits, not only political, but also economic benefits really can a country have when they have this benefit of being a member state of the High Seas Treaty. The need for environmental impact assessments, that of course, it is not only within that, but it impacts also deep seabed mining, it impacts marine protected areas. So there are so many management tools that the High Seas Treaty brings that are incredibly relevant for a country, and that can and that role of you parliamentarians of making sure that that translates into something as basic and as day-to-day for the fishing communities, for Afro-descendant people, for women who are at the forefront of human rights and environmental matters. So very much I see this as one incredible tool that the international community has to complement the other pieces and make sure that we don't continue to just delay processes, but actually get into action. And in doing so, the Secretariat and my colleagues Sarah and Anna have prepared a draft of a Victoria Plan of Action with some points, very specific, some recommendations and action points for parliamentarians to take with you. The Secretariat will share this draft action plan tomorrow, since it has both the today, the Consultative Assembly for Parliamentarians on the Protection of the Oceans, and tomorrow on strengthening democracy in the digital age. But I do want to stress at least these 3 points. One is really to engage all colleagues of political affiliations and governments to achieve, to reinforce both the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to protect and conserve at least 30% of our planet's ocean areas by 2030. Create really a robust framework for marine protected areas on the high seas. And of course, as a third point that is very much connected to the role of parliamentarians, facilitate the treaty and timely entry into force with 60 ratifications by the 2025 UN conference co-hosted by France and Costa Rica. And with this, I just want to finalize maybe saying that this piece also on the consultations and the proposals and including traditional knowledge it really brings also these other key elements that good governance and democracy requires. And I think that piece also must be highlighted. The fact that this is also so a tool that allows us to consult with local communities about what they need, and to really bring that link between parliamentarians and civil society representatives is one of the main goals of PGA. So I very much thank you all. I look forward to sharing the draft Victoria Plan of Action so that parliamentarians can have it and can also give their feedback to it. We will have a 2-week consultation process for you to review the document and to also collect some of those actions and recommendations that we are proposing. And I think I'll close it right there. I'll just say thank you so much. I think we've done great with the time this today. And if there's no other comment or contribution with this, I would close the third Consultative Assembly of Parliamentarians for the Oceans. Just maybe one last thing. I think I mentioned it before, but just in case, I saw Sarah in the chat box wrote her email address. Please make sure if you have any questions, any comments, please write to Anna, to Sarah, or to any of us in the Secretariat, and we will be very happy to help you to know what are the next steps and what we can do together. We are here to assist you in really making sure that this hashtag Race for Ratification reaches as soon as possible the 60 needed countries. Thank you so much.
Bye. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Beck and Daniel.
Thank you.